want to help with in terms of animal welfare legislation, here's my email. I'm also downstairs. I have a table down there, and I'll give you my business cards. They're like trading cards. I've got 1 million of them. I want to help you help animals. So if there's something I can do to help, please come find me or contact me anytime. Now we'll get the real presentation back up here for you, and I'll do my intro. So now that y'all obliged me and let me give a little bit of a little speech on my end, I do want to welcome you again to the second annual VegFest of Eastern Iowa. I was really privileged to be able to attend last year. This year, I think we've already probably beat the turnout. Yeah, poor Sarah in the back, shaking her head. Before we get started with our speaker, I want to thank our presenting sponsors. This year, we have the Brightside Kitchen, A Well-Fed World, and Yelp of Iowa City. Events like this take a lot of time, effort, and money to put on, and without their support, this event wouldn't be possible, so thank you to all of them. We also want to acknowledge the supporting sponsors this year. We've got the Trumpet Blossom Cafe, Veg Fund, and New Pioneer Food Co-op. So please take some time today, look in your event programs. They're all up front. If you didn't get an event program, take a look and look through all the pages and find the sponsors, and whether or not you buy something from them today or this next week, send them a message and thank them for supporting this event. Without local businesses supporting events like this, they just couldn't be put on. So we're really thankful to all of them and all the people who even made individual contributions, big or small, to help put this event on. It seriously made a huge help. Okay, now that all that lip service is out of the way, important lip service, we are really excited to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Udaykumar. He goes by Uday for short, so you can just call him Uday if you see him later on today. He received his PhD in aerospace engineering from the University of Florida and has been teaching engineering at the University of Iowa since 1999, where he is currently a professor of mechanical engineering. He has an expertise in the area of energy and energetics, which I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about today. Uday teaches courses on energy systems, renewable energy, and environmental impacts of energy use here at Iowa during the academic year, and in the summers in Italy and in Hong Kong. Uday switched to a plant-based diet in 2010 due to his research and study of climate change and his work in rural India on sustainable cooking. His understanding of the need for a global shift to a plant-based diet is based on a combination of several years of study, connecting dots, common sense, compassion, concern for the future of our children, and just plain rational thinking. Something that I think Iowans understand, just good old common sense. We're very lucky to have someone here today with so much expertise and to teach us how important diet is to the survival of the planet. Thank you for being here, and without further ado, Uday.
All right, I hope I can be heard back there. Thank you, Preston, and thank you, Cindy, for inviting me. So this is the largest audience I've had for a talk about going plant-based. I've taught courses, classes of 60 and so on and so forth. Classes of 100 on renewable energy. But in most public fora, I have typically 2 or 3 people in the audience, and 2 or 3 of my family members. So that's usually the way it goes, but this is great. So yes, so I'm an engineer, right? So I'm a full-blown technologist. I believe in science, and my coming to veganism was purely based on science. No other route. Okay? You can take many routes to this. You can take the compassion route. You can take the spiritual route. You can just take the health route. You can take lots of routes to this. But mine was purely based on that. Okay, and so I'm going to sort of talk about how science-based, just rational thinking leads us to the inescapable conclusion that we cannot solve global problems, particularly climate change-related problems today, in a sustainable way without switching globally to a plant-based diet. It's just not possible. Okay? So that's my take. I'm vegan because plant-based diet is a clear-minded, rational, science-based, data-driven solution to global problems. Okay? You want to take that route. If you're a heart person, it's just equitable, kind solution to global problems. And I can make relationships between this and feminism, for example, or or treating all kinds of people with justice, equal justice, and so on and so forth, and we can have that conversation. A plant-based diet is also a peaceful, loving, spiritually elevating solution to global problems. Okay, so on all these counts, it just makes perfect sense, and that's the case I can quite easily make to you. But let's start with what is the most important global problem of our time, which is that the Earth is warming. We have no control over it. This is inexorable, okay, and we are responsible for it. But this is not going to go away anytime soon. So the Earth has so far warmed about 1 degree centigrade, about 2 degrees Fahrenheit above historical levels. And you can see this as oodles of data, lots of sources from all around the world. Right? We know that this is actually measurable data. So about 1 degree centigrade, right? Let's keep that number in mind. We have so far warmed 1 degree centigrade above historical levels. Now, this has been a spiral. NASA actually has a very nice GIF. You can see that on their webpage. If you go back in time to the beginning of the 20th century, we were in the blue part of this spiral, and over time it spiraled outward, and that spiral has led us to where we are today, which is 1 degree centigrade, as I said. Good to remember that number. Okay, so climate change is already here. It's not a faraway thing that's going to come at us at the end of the century, just spring out of it like a jack in a box. It's not going to happen like that. It's already here. It's everywhere, all the time, and actually is only just making its presence felt. Okay, scientists talked about this. James Hansen, for example, one of the leading minds in climate science, talked about this 50 years ago. He said, "This is going to happen. It's going to come on. Climate change effects are going to rise above noise and make their presence felt early in the 21st century, and right on time we have it." Okay? And there are something called attributions, which is connecting climate change to events such as extreme weather events. Those attributions are not easy to make. They're very difficult to make, but the fingerprint of climate change can be seen in recent events, which you all know, which are superstorms, which get stronger in time, right? This is Hurricane Dorian, deeper droughts in South Africa now. They have a drought that's been going on for 5 years. California just came out of a drought last year, which lasted several years, right? Deeper droughts, frequent floods. This is a picture from the Midwest. We all are familiar with these sites right now. Forest fires, need I say more? Glacial loss, so loss of glaciers across the planet, right? The receding of glaciers, which means we lose these repositories of fresh water, particularly the Himalayan glaciers, for example, feed almost 600 million people in India, right? And if they go away, then you lose the Gangetic Plain and you lose agriculture in the north of India. Okay, glacier loss, this is in Greenland. Greenland this summer, right? Massive melting of land ice, okay? We know about sea ice loss, which leads to something called a feedback. It's called a sea ice feedback mechanism, which actually accelerates climate change, right? And so we know that the sea ice is disappearing. And mass migrations, which is actually the result of all of these events, right? And mass migrations, you've seen that from Syria, for example, there is good evidence that the migration out of Syria was caused by an enhanced drought that had climate impacts associated with it. There are people actually coming up from South America towards the United States, and a lot of that has to do with climate variations there, okay? So, and these things are going to happen. There are about 1 billion people who will live in climate vulnerable areas that are going to be either hit by drought or by floods or other extreme events, and there are going to be mass migrations. UN predicts up to 500 million people by 2070 or so. Right? And so you're going to see mass migration. So these are all imprints of climate change already sort of making their way felt. Okay? Of course, people will continue to argue about climate change. I mean, in my view, as a scientist, the argument does not need to be made anymore. So as Neil deGrasse Tyson says, do you believe in gravity? Okay, that's the level of certainty that a scientist would have on this. Okay, so, and the cause of climate change is old science. There's nothing mysterious about Science, I'm a rocket scientist, it is not rocket science. Okay? It's very old science. Right? And it's very basic fundamental science. If you do not believe the science that underlies climate change, you should throw away your cell phones. You should get rid of all your technology, because those fundamental sciences are what build your technology for you. Okay? So the reason for climate change, of course, is what's called the greenhouse effect, due to certain gases that we are throwing up into the atmosphere. The primary ones being carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, right? And these have been rising since about 1890, since the industrial era, right? And you can see the rise there in this particular graph. But this is where we are. If we go back in time for about 1 million years, maybe even 2 million years, and you look at the CO2, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, these were historical levels. You can see those oscillations out there, right? And the emergence of human beings on the planet, emergence of Homo sapiens, at least our species, our particular species, right? And if you now look at where we are, we're at 415 parts per million of carbon dioxide. That spike over there, that's just in the last 120 years or so, all right? So we are totally out of whack historically on where CO2 should be, as well as other greenhouse gases, okay? And that spike, we're not done with that spike. If we continue to do what's called business as usual, throwing carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, as we are today, at the end of the century, we are projected to reach the red dot. Okay? Where we are right now is at nearly the 2011 observed level, the purple dot. We're at 415. We will reach that red level. This is business as usual scenario. Okay? And associated with that is lots of things that can possibly happen. All right? I apologize for putting Rumsfeld's picture on there, but he has at least one thing that sort of semi-intelligent to say, which is there are no knowns. Okay, we know what is happening with climate change and greenhouse gases. There are things that we know things. There are known unknowns and there are unknown unknowns, right? So we know the science of climate change. We have the data on what's going on. We are already seeing the effects, but it's very difficult to predict. I think it's Mark Twain who said predictions about the future are very difficult to make, right? So, there's lots of things that can happen, nonlinear effects, feedbacks, all of these things that we don't have a very good handle on, right? So what do we do when we don't have a very good handle on? Do we just sit on our hands? No, we don't, because we go to people who have some clue about it, and this is the IPCC, which is the UN organization that has about 4,000 scientists working together to try to predict and figure out what's going to happen by end of century. We have no recourse but to do that. Correct? There's no other way of trying to figure out what's going to happen. So, we are at 1 degree centigrade right now, right there. And the projection is, if we go along the trajectory of greenhouse gases to end of century, the one at the spike I showed you, the red dot, we will be at 4 degrees centigrade temperature increase by end of century, right? And what does that mean to us? 4 degrees centigrade. It means the following. Currently, at where we are, climate change effects will be less severe than predicted and it will all be fine. There will be some minor damage, but will come out okay. At 1.5 degrees centigrade, okay, climate change effects are as predicted, humans make some changes and the planet comes out okay. Right? A little bit rough on the edges, but it's okay. At 2 degrees centigrade, climate change effects are as predicted, humans are slow to make changes and the planet comes out damaged, and I'll talk about what the damage is. At 3 degrees centigrade, the planet is severely damaged. At 4 degrees centigrade, then we are in catastrophe. Okay? That's where we will be headed for 4 degrees centigrade. And there are lots of scientific data behind this and graphs and all that stuff. The IPCC is going to come out with a report on this next year and laying out in great detail what's going to happen in these different temperature rises. Okay, so we know this. And why is the 2 degrees centigrade limit important? It is important because at 2 degrees centigrade, lots of things are going to happen on Earth, on the planet, that are irreversible. Right? That's irreversible. Okay? No matter what we do, we cannot bring it back to the shape it was in. Okay? And we know what these things are, and they're all fairly scary stuff. Okay, so I don't know if I need to convince you guys in this audience about climate change and its consequences. Usually I end up preaching to the choir, so I assume that you guys are okay with all of this. Okay? But here's what I want to find out. In order to reach the 2 degree centigrade limit, scientists know exactly how much carbon we can put into the atmosphere. All right, and that's that blue circle, this gray circle over here. That's our budget. It's 790 gigatons of carbon. All right, of which we have already put the green part, 515 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere. So what's left that we can possibly add, with all human activity going up to the end of the century is that 275 gigatons of carbon. All right, that's what for the 2 degree centigrade effect. Okay, now, think about it. Looking at all the carbon that is still in the ground in terms of oil and coal and so on and so forth, if all of that is burned, the amount of carbon that will go into the atmosphere is 2,795 gigatons of carbon, which is 10 times the amount that we can put into the atmosphere to reach 2 degrees centigrade. What does that mean? It means that we can only burn 10% of what is left in the ground. Okay? Now try telling that to the big oil companies, because the value of what's left in the ground is $30 trillion. Okay? So we're going to ask them to leave nearly $30 trillion in the ground. Okay? So this is a big ask, right? So that's what we're faced with. Now, additionally, for those of us who have kids, all right, here's the story. So if you look at that budget of carbon we could have put into the atmosphere, all of that is already been spent. The part that goes to our parents has already been spent. In the next few years, you and me will be using up the orange part, and until our lifetimes, most of us, by 2035, we would have used up, with business as usual, the yellow part. That leaves, for our kids, that little blue piece over there. We are going to leave our kids with a thin sliver of possibility of survival. Right? That's where we are. Okay? Now, how can we get out of this? Well, there are lots of scenarios. Okay? And IPCC has made lots of scenarios, lots of possibilities, which was what was signed in the Paris Accord, which we just got out of yesterday. Alright? Now, so one of the scenarios, the most hopeful one, which is almost impossible now, because that was the Paris scenario, is basically to recover out of this carbon emissions pattern. But of all the scenarios, the one that puts us in the safe limit, which is this scenario there with the blue line, right? Don't worry about the numbers, I'm just trying to tell you what that means. In that scenario, to recover out of this, the only possible way is for us to pull carbon out of the air. It's called negative carbon emissions. Okay? We have to pull carbon out of the air somehow. Okay? Now, there is no real good way to pull carbon out of the air. People will talk about carbon sequestration technology and all that stuff. It is still all on drawing boards. There's no real functioning, economically viable carbon sequestration technology out there. There have been 2 or 3 experiments that have been tried and failed. Okay? Right? The only carbon sequestration technology that is freely available to us, right, that has always been available, is natural carbon sequestration, because 1/3 of the carbon that we emit goes into trees. Correct? 1/3. When something comes out of your tailpipe, 1/3 stays up in the air, 1/3 goes into trees, 1/3 goes into the oceans and mixes with the oceans. Right? Now, so we need trees to absorb this carbon dioxide, right, for negative carbon emissions. And the only way to do that is in forests. Okay? So forests are carbon safe deposit vaults. because they absorb about a third of the atmospheric CO2. That's the only way to pull carbon out of the air. All right? Now, if you look at where all the carbon goes, there are maps that are produced by scientists and so on as to where the carbon on the planet is stored. Most of the carbon, the dark green part, is where the carbon is being stored, and it is in the forests, particularly in the tropical forests. There are also cold forests, for example, the boreal forests. You can see them in Canada up there, the light green forests, and also in the tundra out there in Russia, for example. But those are not very heavily carbon storing, right? Most of the storage happens in the tropics, right? So you can see this, there are papers in science and all that stuff, doing exact measurements on how much carbon is stored where, right? And we know that most of the carbon is stored here, the red part there, and that is the Amazon, and there, which is the forest in Central Africa, in Indonesia and the archipelagos out there, Malaysia and so on and so forth. That band is a tropical rainforest band. And that's where most of the carbon is stored, right? Okay. So where does the carbon go? It goes, most people think it goes into the leaves and so on. No, it actually goes, half of it goes into the ground. It's stored as carbon in the soil. And half of it, approximately half of it, goes into the tree trunks. So you need woody plants, you need large woody trees to store carbon. You cannot do it in grass, for example, right? So you need very dense wood to store the carbon. And if you look at what's happening to these woody trees in the forests of the world, most of the forests in the world are pretty much gone. 50% of the forests have been cleared, of which 50% were cleared in the last 50 years. Okay, so deforestation is everywhere. Deforestation is a different animal in different places. So for example, in Canada, our civilized neighbors up to the north, right? What is happening in Canada into the boreal forest? Of course, Canada has had a very progressive Prime Minister. But if you look at the boreal forests, that's the boreal forest in Canada, very nice view. They now look like this, a large part of them, right? And this is tar sands, this is our oil fields, this is where the Keystone Pipeline comes from, right? So this is why people are fighting to stop that pipeline, because it brings tar sand oil, which is the worst kind of oil. We do not need that oil in the world, okay? Because it's very expensive to produce and also very dirty. And so, that's what Canada is doing. It's converting soil into oil, okay? And that's tar sands. Okay, what about tropical forests? So as I said, most of the carbon is stored in the tropics, in the tropical forests. And of course, tropical forests have been disappearing, and the place where they're disappearing the most is Brazil, number one, correct? So that's the deforestation in Brazil just last year, all right? And this is the trend of deforestation in Brazil. This is 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. You can see that spike over there, okay? Burning forests in Brazil, in the Amazon. Because they have a new political leader, right? And one of his famous quotes is that it's enough to poop every other day. That will be better for the whole world. That's the solution to environmental problems, okay? And what's happening in Brazil is getting a haircut, right? It's basically loss of forest looking like that, all right? And you can see time-lapse NASA images of this. Please do, there's a link. I can give you this PowerPoint if you want, and just go look at what's happening in Brazil. With the deforestation, and most of the deforestation, about 70% of deforestation in Brazil is to grow cattle. For cattle or for soybeans, all right? To feed animals, okay? So this is what's happening in Brazil. So, the Amazon is replaced by that wonderful scene out there. In less than a decade, Brazil has improved from the 4th largest exporter to the number 1 exporter of beef in the world. That's cattle production in Brazil numbers. And you can see the trend here. Brazil increasing the middle line there, increasing cattle production, and the Amazon disappears. All right. Of course, Brazil also is now the world's top soy producer. Correct? in fact, since the tariffs were imposed in the United States, Brazil actually supplied the soy. Instead of Iowa supplying the soy, it comes from Brazil, and the Amazon gets cleared. Okay. So if you look at China, exports of China to Brazil is mostly machinery and lots of other prepared goods, electronics, chemicals, iron and steel, and the export of Brazil to China is soybeans. Right? Because the Chinese need soybeans for the pigs. Right? They have about 500 million pigs to feed in China. All right? So China imports of agricultural products from Brazil is the blue line, from the United States is the red line. Of course, there's a crossover. This is just the result of the recent tariffs. Okay? But it's not just the Chinese. If you look at the European Union, fresh/chilled and frozen beef imports, where are the Europeans getting their beef from? From the Amazon. Right? So you can see that's Brazil there in the orange. So Argentina, and that's not quite Amazon, but also grassland, and Paraguay, Uruguay, and the rest of the world is a dark blue part, right? So mostly from South America, right? So EU trade in food, top partners Brazil, right? That's where your Amazon is. So what is happening in Africa? Same story, no difference. Okay, same story. So the Central African jungles are disappearing, and this is because, again, this is NASA image of fires in Africa, right? The red part there. And if you look, what is going on in that red part? Why are they burning those forests? This is data on the cattle per capita, cattle per head for various countries. That red line is United States. United States is about 100 million head of cattle, 300 million people approximately, right? So 0.3 is the United States number. All these countries here have greater cattle per person, per head, than does the United States, right? All these on the right side of the line. And if you look at where all the burning is happening, right? So all of those countries are burning their forests to feed cattle. Okay? So 2/3 actually of burning of forest around the world is basically for livestock. Correct? But the planet, how much cattle do we have on the planet? We have 1.4 billion head of cattle. They weigh more than human beings in total. Okay? But only provide 1.5% of global calories. All right? So we've used up an entire continent of Africa to feed cattle. Okay? Yet they only give us 1.5% of global calories. Okay? Why is that the case? Because it's terribly inefficient. If you take the amount of energy contained in food and you look at how it's converted to food for humans, cattle and other livestock and animal products are the worst way to convert energy from the sun to energy for humans. You have so many middlemen taking up all that energy before it gets to you. Right? So, because it's highly inefficient, the most inefficient are mutton and beef. So this is an efficiency. What percentage of energy actually comes to us as food given an input of energy? Okay? The worst ones are beef and mutton. Right? And there's lots of charts on this, lots of scientific data that you can look at. I can tell you about references. So cattle are responsible for 18% of greenhouse gas emissions, more than automobiles and airplanes and all that put together. If cattle were a country, they would be number 3 in global emissions. Okay? China would be number 1, United States number 2, and just cattle country is number 3. Okay? So if you look at various diets, in my view, if you do the calculations on driving miles based on various diets, which it means that the omnivore diet is like driving a Hummer. Okay? A diet without meat, a vegetarian diet is like driving a Prius, and a vegan diet is like riding a bike. Okay? That's the level of energy difference between those 3 diets. Okay? We all get this question. We go to a grocery store, and the person at the counter will typically ask you, paper or plastic, right? We always have this agonizing choice, paper or plastic, oh my God, I can't decide. You know, I actually did a class project on this. I asked my students to find out which is better, paper or plastic. Actually, it's a wash. Okay? There's no real difference between the two of them. And then of course we agonize, and then eventually we feel really good because we have a green bag. Right? It's like, oh my God, I did the right thing. Correct? But what we forget is it's not the bag, it's what's in the bag that makes the difference as far as carbon emissions goes. Because if you look at the embodied energy that goes into the materials that you're taking home from the grocery store, that's plastic bag, that's paper bag, that is a veggie-based diet, and that's a meat-based diet. So we're asking the wrong question. It's not the bag, it's what's in the bag. That's embodied energy, right? So it's not just emissions. Water is a big issue, right? Because we have, with 1 gallon of milk, for example, you need 683 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of milk. Correct? Which is one reason why scientifically I went vegan as opposed to vegetarian, is because there's lots of other impacts that come from just having cows around. Right? So, gallons of water consumed per pound of retail food purchased, all the top ones are going to be animal foods, and all the less water ones are going to be plant foods. So water is a big issue. Can we make it more efficient? Yes, we can make it more efficient. The best way to do animals is this. This is the most efficient way to do it. Factory farming. Which is why people do it, because it's efficient. You're getting a lot of profit out of this, right? If it was inefficient, you would not make profit. Okay? So trapping animals in grassless environments and feeding them out of conveyor belts and depriving them of grass so that they can actually be in their own poop in very crowded circumstances so that they get diseases, and then you have to pump them with antibiotics. 85% of all antibiotic use is for animals. Right? Is the best way to do it. Okay? Which makes, increase of weight of the animals, faster production, less resource utilization. Okay? And we are not alone. Everybody is doing this now. I mean, if you look at the China's meat consumption is skyrocketing. An average Chinese person now today eats 7 times the meat they ate 20 years ago. Okay? So this is, in China there's lots of data on how their soy imports, corn imports, meat demands, all of them skyrocketing exponentially because now they have money, and the moment people have economic wherewithal, they spend on animal foods. Okay? So this is something we've exported. This is the absolute height of it. This is actually Saudi Arabia putting money into growing meat in the Arizona desert. All right. So this is these are the underwater resources of fresh water being used to farm crops to feed animals. This is actually the best way to do this. This is the most efficient way to produce meat. Okay, and this is being done in the deserts of Arizona. There's a beautiful article on this in the New York Times. You can read it. The link is right there. If you want a PowerPoint, I can give it to you. So, of course, it's not just emissions and water, it's also health, right? Where do you get if you're vegan, you get this question. First question, where do you get your protein from? It's like, where do the elephants get their protein from? They're vegan. So, that's one that irritates me immensely, okay? You should ask people in the opposite question, where do you get your excessive protein from? Because excessive protein is not good for you. Most Americans consume about 96 grams of protein a day. They only need about 50 grams. Okay? So that's not good for you. So we are what we eat. And of course, you can look at this, our wonderful food system that is promoted worldwide, and you're told this is a great diet by given nice diagrams and everything. So these are obesity rates. Okay? So we are, of course, the world leader. Alright? So Mexico is number 2, our closest neighbor, right? There's England, Canada, blah, blah, all these countries. Okay? So take it for what it is. The diet matters. as far as all of this is concerned as well, right? And of course, in Mexico, they have turned around and actually become worse because of things that have changed their lifestyle, and one of them is our exported food system, okay? And this is a worldwide trend. It's not just here, it's everywhere. You go to China, you go to Hong Kong, it's the same kind of situation. This is what people are eating. The environment pays for this because we create, by farming in Iowa, we create dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico, correct? Where everything dies because of hypoxia, and we have a toxic fallout. Dead zones are, of course, one example of toxic fallout. The other one is antibiotics in farm animals. There's a map of antibiotics in farm animals. So we pump them full of antibiotics because they are living in circumstances that are unhealthful to them. They are all serried together in confined zones, correct? And they're fed things that they should not be fed. Like cows are fed corn. Cows do not naturally eat corn, they eat grass. So these kinds of things, correct? So you're making them unhealthy and then pumping them with antibiotics. And where that's going to go, it's going to go in the water. You're going to create superbugs, right? You're going to create new flu variations of swine flu and bird flu, blah, 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 blah. Okay, anyway, you know what that story is. Will they be saved by grass? The moment I say this, people will say, but grass-fed, I eat grass-fed. Well, if you eat grass-fed, good for you, because only about 10% of the people will be able to eat grass-fed. Because the amount of land required to produce grass-fed meats is huge, because it's grazing land. We've already cleared out forests to let these animals graze. How much more are you going to clear out? And so if you look at the map of the world, people are burning forests to graze animals. The grazeland is pretty much grazing land has covered the planet. There's really no more grazing land, okay? And grasses do not sequester carbon. It is the forest that sequesters carbon. If you replace a forest with grassland, the carbon sequestration goes away. Right? Both under the ground and in the wood. There is no wood. There's just grass. Grass does not sequester carbon. It's the wood that sequesters carbon. And you have to have very deep roots. All that carbon has to filter into the soil and go deep into the ground in order to sequester it, right? Grasses don't have roots that go deep into the ground. It's the trees that have it. So therefore, you cannot sequester. There are numbers on this. This is not just cooked up stuff, ad hoc, right? You can look up the numbers. And then, of course, there's a devastation of the biosphere. I just want to leave this picture with you, okay, which is this. The sheer evidence of weight. So if you look at the planet currently, what we have done as a species is replace every living thing on the planet with what we eat. Okay, so for example, this is the green dots here are all the wild animals on the planet. The central part is humans, the weight of humans on the planet, the weight of cows on the planet, horses, sheep, and so on. All those dots are all the weight of creatures, either us or our foods, right? And the green dots are everything else. And you can look at this graph, which gives you a comparison of the weights. That's all land vertebrates, and there's us and our domesticated animals, all right? So, going back in time, what used to be the picture? This blue big circle about, before humans took over the planet was wild animals, right? And that gray dot there was the humans on the planet, right? And in 1970, the blue dot was the wild animals, the green colored dot was humans, and the rest of them were domesticated food animals. And this is 2010. That's the wild animals, that's humans, and the orange are the farmed animals, and the pink are food for farmed animals. So we've taken over the planet and converted the planet into a resource for us to make animals to eat. This is what we've done with the biosphere, right? And we are in the middle of what's called the sixth mass extinction. Okay. So this is all caused by our the way we actually produce and consume food, right? So the question I leave you with is, when are we going to see the last elephant to roam free? Okay, and the declining elephant numbers, and so on. So what we eat matters not just from the point of view of climate and a changing planet. It matters because of toxins. It matters because of the way we use water resources. the way we treat the oceans. It matters because of our personal health. It matters because of what is coming, which is that once climate change effects start getting more severe, people will move. One thing I always hear is, humans have seen climate change all the time because climate change happens in cycles, right? There are the ice ages and then the thaws, ice ages, thaws. It happens every 100,000 years. Humans have been around, in various forms for about 2 billion years. So we've seen several climate cycles. So people say, those people a long time back without technology faced climate change and they adapted to it, correct? Two things about that. First, those climate changes used to take place over tens of thousands of years. This one is happening over just 3 centuries, right? Okay. And secondly, when those climate changes took place, humans migrated all over the planet. And there were very few of them. Now, by mid-century, we will have about 11 billion humans. This time climate change hits us, we have nowhere to go. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so informative and scary too. We have time for some questions. If anybody wants to ask a question, I can bring the microphone or you can yell it out.
Hi, sir. You're obviously in the state of Iowa, which is an agricultural state. Is there anything that's happening with policy, with the Department of Agriculture, that you would talk to farmers that maybe be smarter to raise crops as to have beef? Has there been any economic studies on any of this?
I don't know. That's not the area of expertise. I hope something like that can be done. I mean, the reality is, of course, that currently the world is heavily invested in animal foods. That's the reality, right? And so that you have to completely sympathize with the farming community and farmers and so on because we are in that system, and to move over to a new system is going to be very, very difficult, correct? And there's the same argument that one can present about coal miners, right? These people had very difficult lives. They basically, coal is what built our economies. And so you have to be sympathetic to the coal miners. But there are lots of intelligent things that can be done with coal miners instead of bringing back or maintaining coal. Right? For example, we can actually put them on, offer them support for retraining, or even just pay them a pension so they can live their lives comfortably for the rest of their existence. It's not going to cost that much. Okay? But these require people to actually start thinking rationally about this problem. Whenever we bring up climate change or switching diets, people always have this crazy reaction of, you guys are telling us to do blah, blah, blah. But if they just stood back and actually rationally made a case for themselves and thought about the problem and thought about their kids and what's going to happen to them in 25 years, I think policies could be arrived at. But I don't know if that's going to happen.
No. I'm a student in the engineering department, and thank you for being one of the very few people in our department that's actually talking about the issue. My question is, you just described the amount of money that there is in the ground for these people to make. Granted, the systems that we've built, the capitalistic system seems to be profit-driven. Do you think that we can fix that issue if within the system that we have? Or are we doomed just because of its nature?
Well, I mean, okay, so I see where you're coming from, and of course it's a very difficult problem, right? I personally am not terribly keen when people say things like the governments or the corporations have to change. We are the government and the corporations. The corporations will give us what we want, and the governments will give us what we want, so we have to change what we want. right? It's us, it's on us. It's not, you know, you can't, the radicalism is not about saying, hey, I don't like this government, right? I give you an example of Canada. Progressive government does nothing, okay? On the contrast, Brazil, non-progressive, right-wing government does nothing. So it's not the government, it's us. As long as the Canadians want oil from the tar sands, right? Then the government will do the, as long as we want meat, the corporation supplies it. Okay? So what do we want? Right? And there are changes that are already happening. You know, corporations shake a lot when you make those changes. A very recent example is the car companies and how California, just by taking that stand saying, we are not going to conform to this rewrite of the Obama rules. Basically, the corporations, at least many of them, the car companies, you know, said, okay, we will go with you because we don't want to split the market. Right? So it depends on what the market demands, and we are the market. So as long as we don't change, the governments and corporations are not going to change. Because they are driven by other motives. The corporations are driven by profit, and the governments are driven by power. And it's up to us to take it away from them. And, you know, if we start demanding different, we will get different.